Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IWM 101 Foundations and Inspirations. This is the very first webinar in our Winter 2026 IWM webinar series. My name is Tanveer Alvi. I'm the training coordinator here at Clearwater. We still have a lot of people joining us for this webinar, but they'll keep joining us. And we can, I guess, start with the webinar. We are already 2 minutes over. I'll just quickly share my screen. All right, so I would like to start with the acknowledgement to country. Clearwater acknowledges the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people as the traditional owners of the land from where we operate and pays respect to the elders past and present and elders and people from other communities who may be here today. Just a quick outline of what we'll be doing today. So now I'll be following up with the housekeeping and give you a short overview of the program Clearwater, what it is and what it does. And then I'll go on to introducing our presenters and speakers. Then we'll go on to the first part of the presentation, talking about what is IWM and where we have got with it in Victoria. Following that, we'll have a short 5-minute Q&A session. After that, we'll continue with the second part of the presentation, talking about where IWM is heading in Victoria. And then our last Q&A session. After that, we'll aim at closing the webinar at around 2 p.m. So the general housekeeping rules, as you know, the session is being recorded. Your microphones and video cameras will be disabled, and please keep them off while the speaker is presenting. Chat and Q&A functions are available to post your comments and to ask questions. I would request you to keep your comments to the chat section and use the Q&A for posting your questions. You can use the vote or like button to vote questions in the Q&A section, because during the dedicated Q&A session, we will be preferring the questions which have most likes or votes. Or during these Q&A sessions, you can also use the virtual raise hand function if you would like to be unmuted to ask question using your microphone. A very quick overview of the program Clearwater. So we are hosted and funded by Melbourne Water, and we receive project funding from DECA. The goal of Clearwater is to build capability to support livable places, healthy environments, and resilient communities. And the program has been working to do this since 2002. Our goal is to develop skills, share knowledge, and build networks. And we do that through providing training, industry tours, and networking events. And we also have a huge online library on our website. You can go to our website or on our Humanitics events page to look at our upcoming courses. We have, as you know, we already have this winter webinar series throughout the month of August. So we have one webinar every week. In addition to that, we have a very new course, which is about WASUD assets designing. I would encourage the IWM and WASUD professionals to go and take a look at it. And we also have maintenance of street-scale WASUD assets in November. So a quick look at our presenters. Before going on to introducing Celeste Morgan, I wanted to say that we were also to have Jeddah, who is again from Europe. She is the IWM lead in Europe, but she is not very well today, and hence she won't be able to present. Her part will be done by Celeste Morgan. Celeste is the Australasian IWM lead, and in her role, she has been working very closely in the IWM field in Victoria as well. She was involved in the evolution of IWM in Victoria and has shaped pivotal initiatives in policy and practice, including catchment scale IWM plans for Melbourne and the IWM planning guidelines. So she's a thought leader on topics ranging from stormwater, offset schemes to recycled water and urban growth. She's known for translating complex challenges into clear, actionable insights that inspire better outcomes for communities. Along with Celeste, we also have Laura Taylor from DECA. Laura, if you can quickly say hello to everyone. So
hello.
Laura is also joining us from DECA. And yes, we are very lucky to have Laura and Celeste here today with us. So Celeste, we can't wait to hear all your insights that you have to share with us today. I'll stop sharing my screen now and hand over to you, Celeste.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming today. We do have a jam-packed agenda, and yeah, looking forward to sharing some reflections with you all. As Tanvir said, please, if you've got any questions, post them in the chat. And yeah, if you can take the time to like other people's questions, then we'll take those ones first. Bit of a competition. Yeah, I'm pleased to, I guess, share some of the reflections and insights on the journey of integrated water management in Victoria. The structure of this webinar is really, first of all, I'm going to tackle what is integrated water management briefly, just for those on the call that aren't so familiar with the term. And then I'll go into what's been happening with it in Victoria over the last 10 or so years. And then in the second session, we will talk about where it's heading. So it is a continual evolution, and there's some interesting things on the horizon. So what is integrated water management? It's one of those terms which I think means many things to many people. So I'll try and shed some light on that and some other terminology that is kicking around the place. I'll start with this, which I think is a kind of historical evolution, which helps people frame why we are where we are. Some of you may have seen it before and may also be familiar with the term water-sensitive city. When any city in the world, started, it was usually positioned next to a water supply. Obviously, water is essential to humanity. And as we grew our cities and our urban settlements, we were focused around that water supply and making that efficient and effective. Then as our populations grew in different areas, we needed to introduce sewers and wastewater systems to avoid that pollution and those health risks, and we became sewered cities. And then as our urban areas became more and more impervious, we had problems with flooding and also waterway pollution, and introduced a drainage to cope with that stormwater. Then we noticed that our waterways were suffering from that stormwater impact, and we became more focused on waterway outcomes. In the Victorian context, there was definitely a large movement around waterway health in the 1980s and 90s, which led to initiatives such as water-sensitive urban design coming into place, where we can naturally capture and treat our stormwater from our cities. And then gradually, I guess a lot of cities thought about, well, could we be using resources in a more circular way? Can we think about reuse and become a water cycle city? But the ultimate ambition is to move towards a water-sensitive city, which really celebrates water in all its forms, integrates the water cycle, and thinks about those other benefits that we can drive, whether that be greening and urban cooling, as well as community awareness and multifunctional landscapes. And integrated water management is really the journey or the process that we go on to help this evolution of our thinking around the water cycle. We think about Victoria in particular, there have been a key turning points in Victoria's journey over time. As I mentioned, waterway pollution was definitely a key driver in the 80s and 90s, and led to, say, the best practice guidance and the targets that we aim for in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and suspended solids pollutant removal and stormwater management. But really in the 2000s, when drought struck, we really started to think about how we could capture water resources from our urban areas, like recycled wastewater and stormwater, to be a new water supply. And we've evolved through the 2010s to really think about, well, how can we support livability outcomes? So our cities and towns are getting hotter. So how can we be supporting greening and cooling? And at present, I think we're in a phase where we're thinking about how can we make this more sophisticated? How can we change our governance structures and think more at a catchment-wide scale about integrated water management? So how do we summarize all that and integrate water management as a term? It's important to recognize that it is a verb, it's a doing word, it's about a process, it's not about a thing. So it's important to distinguish. You don't, I guess, point at initiatives and say, that is the IWM. IWM is the process that gets you there. And those solutions, which could include a whole portfolio of initiatives, are place-based specific. And we need to think about things in an integrated way, and integrated water management is that holistic and collaborative approach, which breaks down the silos that we've set up for ourselves in water management by thinking about stormwater, wastewater, and water supply somewhat separately, and now thinks about all of those things in one, but also places that in a place-based context. The diagram or the wheel that you see on the right there includes the kind of benefits that we're trying to drive in Victoria. These are known as the strategic outcomes that we drive through IWM in Victoria, and you can see that there are many of those. It is multifaceted, and it always has to be underpinned through these inner circles of collaboration, commitment, and capacity. So there's a different way of thinking about IWM, and I think we could call this IWM 101 or a weaker IWM. It's just at least thinking about all parts of the water cycle at the same time. So how can we optimize and recognize the cross benefits between stormwater management, wastewater management, and water supply? But really what we want to work towards is strong integrated water management, which thinks about those overlaps, but places that in that placemaking context. So talking to our colleagues who are planners, landscape architects, people who are influencing the built environment, whether that be buildings or roads or city shaping at a larger scale. So we can drive those broader benefits that water obviously underpins as a key survival source for not only humans, but also our plants and landscapes and ecosystems, but also driving those co-benefits, whether it be around cooling, flood resilience, and just beautification and joy within our environments. So when we bring that together, what does it look like? And as I said, IWM is a process, but the outcomes can be quite different in different places and really respond to the context that's needed. So we could be creating opportunities for greener places, for soaking more water into the ground and keeping it into the landscape. We could be supporting healthier environments, whether that's waterways, coastlines, or bays, securing our water supplies, so providing those new opportunities to capture, treat, and reuse our water locally, whether that's rainwater, stormwater, or our wastewater, creating cooler and more resilient environments, and effectively supporting livability. But there's many different initiatives in that portfolio that can come to bear. Oops. So how do we, what does IWM planning look like? Many of you may have come across an IWM plan or a strategy, and that can be done at different scales. It might be for a development, it might be for a council, it might be for a growth area. And generally, these go through a fairly similar process to develop them. It is understanding the place-based strategic drivers, bringing together that evidence base. You might hear us talk about a water balance. That's really just building the whole water cycle profile for a place and understanding how that will change over time. So as we develop more, will we have more wastewater, more stormwater? What will the demands look like? And where are they? Are they within buildings? Are they within open spaces? So that's why we build that picture. And then we define those place-based outcomes and objectives for IWM, analyze the options that could make a difference, prioritize those, and then develop the plan and incorporate that into the proposal going forward and various implementation mechanisms, which I'll talk a little bit more about shortly. That's IWM in a nutshell. Hopefully we're all on the same page as to what we're talking about today and that process of integrated water management. But I want to reflect on, I guess, how far we've got with IWM in Victoria. And it's worth noting that Victoria is very much a leader on the global stage in this area and has made great strides forward over recent years. So in terms of the main things that have been happening and the key progresses that we have made in Victoria, I would say those are threefold. First of all, we've been rethinking the governance. So I described the journey of many cities has acted to create silos, I guess, in how we manage water. So often we'll have certain responsibilities for councils, but also in Melbourne's case, Melbourne Water, in terms of managing parts of the drainage system and stormwater. We'll often have water authorities, which are managing water supply and wastewater quite separately. We'll have different authorities thinking about catchment health and waterway health. And that creates disconnects in systems. So rethinking governance has been a key focusing area for Victoria. We've also been working hard to kind of trial some of those initiatives that might come up. What are the ways that we could reimagine our water infrastructure and how they're integrated into our cities and our towns through built form, whether that's road infrastructure or buildings or open spaces. And then redefining value, because we are driving a lot of different benefits. So how can we capture those benefits? So I'll chat through some of those advances that we've seen within Victoria. The first one on governance. This diagram on the left here really talks about how generally in Victoria, we've set ourselves up in those silos that I described. So generally a water corporation, a local council, and a catchment management authority, all having separate responsibilities and dealing with separate streams of water, which leads to missed opportunities. Integrated water management governance instead tries to bring those together through collaboration and conversation and to change the outcomes in doing so. And so it formalizes those collaborations together and brings shared objectives and outcomes to the fore. Importantly, that also includes traditional owners and recognizing that they've been caring for our catchments and country for millennia and wanting to bring everybody that impacts the water cycle into the fold. So many of you would have heard of the IWM Forums, which have been set up across the Melbourne region. There's 5 forums which are based on the major 5 catchments. They're also set up within regional Victoria, usually according to the main water authority boundaries. But the focus of those IWM forums is to get that executive level commitment to IWM and to define those shared outcomes for the forum area and to provide that authorizing environment to make shared decisions. Now that was I guess the embedded policy that supports that was developed as part of the Integrated Water Management Framework in 2017, and that enabled the forums to be created. And now the forums have been active for many years, most of them since 2018, and some of those have gone on to set targets and develop catchment scale plans, which I'll talk a little bit about, and now are in the process of really embedding those targets and setting actions for stakeholders to deliver. The benefit, at least of having that broader view, is that it's naturally collaborative to think at a catchment scale, to think across a region and break down those organizational boundaries. So these forums are kind of set on an equal footing, so every stakeholder has a seat at the table, and we can really enable that coordination of the whole water cycle and paint a picture of those shared benefits that we want to drive. So that has been the impetus for developing strategic direction statements for each IWM forum, and now the plans and the actions that underpin those. There's also a plethora of key strategies and policy documents that exist in Victoria that provide a mandate for integrated water management in the round, because it does deliver so many different benefits. There are key strategies that are in place which support IWM outcomes and reference that, which range from sustainable water management, sustainable water strategies, but also water security plans, which support IWM, healthy waterway strategy within Melbourne, and others which are coming out in the region to support those catchment level objectives. And I'll talk a little bit more about some emerging key policies which are really driving IWM along, which has come out through the Urban Stormwater Management Guidelines. There's also Water as Life, which brings that traditional owner perspective and country statements to help us align outcomes for IWM. Just to touch on this, because it is such a key, I guess, policy driver, which has come into place recently, is the Urban Stormwater Management Guidelines, which have been produced by the EPA and that link to the Healthy Waterways Strategy within Melbourne, but which also provide a platform for action in regional areas as well. This really reframes, I guess, the journey that I talked about earlier, that our focus has been on stormwater management from a pollutant and treatment point of view, with the theory that cleaner stormwater will provide protection to our waterways. A review of science really, I guess, challenged that assumption and found that the greatest correlation between waterway health was really around just the sheer volume of stormwater entering our waterways. So the policy focus is now shifting on how we can just remove runoff entering our waterways from developed areas and keep that at a more natural level that the waterway can cope with. So not just treating, but harvesting and infiltrating that runoff where it arises within developments so that we can work towards a more natural water balance. So some of the details that some of you will be familiar with there is that there are targets that are available, and you'll see throughout these slides, which we can distribute. There are links to different documents which outline some of these targets. That they are divided into two areas. There are priority areas where we're asking for that removal of runoff and that harvesting to be quite advanced to really protect those priority waterways, which are defined by the Catchment Management Authority, and other areas which provide a baseline level of performance within more urbanized areas where waterways have already been impacted, but where we want to provide that ongoing improvement and help with other benefits such as flood resilience. And how do we do this? How do we harvest stormwater and infiltrate it? To get to the kind of priority targets that we've outlined here, where you're getting up to around 80% removal of runoff, it does take initiatives at every scale. So it's important to think about opportunities to remove stormwater runoff at both the allotment and street scale, whether that's through rainwater harvesting and also capturing, evaporating and infiltrating through water-sensitive urban design initiatives at that scale, plus whether it's possible to also capture runoff at a precinct scale for open space utilization for irrigation, or through larger initiatives, and then also at a regional scale. And some of those proposals, I guess, to scoop up runoff at a larger scale and reuse those at a larger scale are definitely being considered across Victoria, so that we can make that real impact on waterway health, but also drive water security benefits. So that's definitely a key policy progression, which is very much front of mind in the industry at the moment. How is it applied? So this is a moving, I guess, context, but at the moment it's applied under the Environment Protection Act, under the General Environmental Duty, which obliges all organisations to demonstrate that they have taken all reasonably practicable approaches to minimise harm. So there's a bit of a, I guess, grey area as to how that's enforced, but that does provide, I guess, the legitimate expectation that all organisations, so that would include developers, councils, etc., to be showing that they are doing everything that's reasonably practicable to be reducing stormwater volume reduction. And certainly some councils have interpreted that they would require that of developers to make that demonstration through their development response, which you can see as City of Whittlesea example there. There is consideration whether these targets will also be included within Victoria's planning provisions in the future. but that is still under consideration and development to be effectively applied through the planning scheme. The next aspect that I wanted to chat through is just how Victoria has been going in reimagining cities and water, and some of the key examples of that. How far have we got? So a few stats for you. We have managed to reuse a total of 9% of our total stormwater and wastewater coming off the Melbourne region. So these stats are for the Melbourne region. So that's where we've been monitoring data so far, which has been no mean feat. So a lot of stormwater harvesting and recycled water reuse going on to get to that. We're supporting large amounts of active open space and passive open space with alternative sources. And in the Melbourne region, we have some significant quantities of green-blue infrastructure in wetlands, waterway improvements, and rain gardens that have been introduced largely over the last 10 to 15 years. So I mentioned that it's a place-based response, and I think it's worth thinking about the opportunities for IWM based on, can we make impact with local decentralized water systems, or can we introduce a regional scheme, being the horizontal axis there? Are we constrained by urban design, or can we explore new concepts for urban design? And there are different, I guess, possibilities that lean into each of those. Some examples I'll just chat through briefly. Aquarivo, you may have heard of, I guess, looks like a normal development, but in terms of the tech and what's going on inside the houses and the community education, it is very advanced. So they have smart tanks, which are monitored, which collect rainwater and then release it ahead of a storm coming so that they can refill. They've also trialled using rainwater for hot water supply, which is a new demand, which can be accessed within the home. They also have a recycled water plant in use on site, which provides two non-potable uses for toilet flushing and garden irrigation. So that's a great example, which is on the ground. In terms of new concepts for urban design, this is a development in Castlemaine called the Paddock, which has really experimented with communal growth gardens and use of water. It has communal rainwater tanks, and is really questioning, I guess, how communities interact with water, but also with themselves, and establishing that new way of life and new urban design principles. For regional examples, there's a great one in Warrnambool, which we can link you to as well, which harvests from roofs and new development, takes that water, creates a new dual drainage system from rooftops, and takes that to a local reservoir to then be integrated with the city's water supply. So lots of different opportunities depending on the scale of influence and whether you're involved in the development design. Those regional catalysts, as I mentioned, that changing, I guess, stormwater harvesting drivers is providing us with more opportunities to think about what happens at the larger scale. Many developments build wetlands anyway to meet water quality targets. So can we be harvesting from those wetlands, and can we do that in a network arrangement to take them to a new source of demand nearby, whether that's a reservoir or for local reuse? We're not the only ones thinking about this. So outside of Victoria, some of you may have heard of Erythropolis, which is an area of Western Sydney where they are thinking about effectively the same kind of solutions. So can we combine stormwater harvesting? Can we blend that with local recycled water use and supply that back to development? They're also thinking about how to embed better requirements for cooling and greening in the planning requirements so that there is a uplifted demand for irrigation to help reuse all of those water sources. Fisherman's Bend is another good Victorian example where they are thinking about, I guess, a redevelopment area and what's possible. Again, using a combination of recycled water, but also smart rainwater tanks in apartment buildings to be utilizing rainwater to control flood impacts, but also to provide that first pass alternative supply, which is then backed up again through recycled water supply. No mean feat to integrate all of this with planning requirements and education, all of the proponents that needs to be done. So it does take collaboration, in this case, between council, Southeast Water, Melbourne Water, developers, and state government. I'll touch quickly on retrofits, which is another important aspect. It's not just about new development. This example is how City of Melbourne have been rethinking their city and looking at priority areas for retrofitting integrated water management initiatives within streetscapes. Here they embedded a spatial tool within council to at least do a first pass of feasibility, suitability for initiatives, and then look at prioritizing those and some suggested typologies. What does that look like? Well, it looks like understanding how rainfall is falling on the city, how it naturally drains in streetscapes and where it effectively disappears underground into catch pits, and how we could intercept ahead of those. So that gives us an idea of where within the streetscape it makes most sense to introduce things like permeable paving or rain gardens or passively irrigated street trees. And to do that as well with the benefit lens in mind. So where is the most potential from a treatment perspective, from a flood storage priority? Where can we get the biggest bang for buck in terms of intercepting the most stormwater, and where are the urban heat priority areas in terms of the vulnerability of the population? That is now a kind of embedded system for council where they can see these kind of windows of opportunity, and it links them to possible design typologies within their own system, which they can then apply. So any part of council can see that and use it as a first pass for potential solutions. The last bit I'll touch on quickly before we go to a short question break is just redefining value. So that's been a key part of the journey in Victoria. Part of that is, I guess, a rethinking of the role of water utilities and water corporations to not just be service providers, but to be purveyors of livability. So how can we be responding to communities' needs for water by becoming an active participant in enabling IWM? Often that involves an organisation acting beyond their sphere of control, beyond their, I guess, responsibilities, which are written, and merging into their sphere as influence, working with other stakeholders, and the sphere of context. To do this in the round, there's been a lot of work done on how we can value benefits better. So valuing the amenity benefits of community engagement, of greening, and bringing those into the conversation, as well as the standard benefits around perhaps the cost of water and water reuse, and then also getting an understanding of who's receiving those benefits as part of the business case, whether that be councils or stakeholders directly, or whether it's going to, say, park users or the broader community as a whole, benefiting from things like waterway health. There are a lot of resources which we've linked you to in this presentation if you're interested in that. Another aspect which is becoming more commonplace in IWM is thinking about the forward plan. So not just doing a plan that sits on a shelf, but understanding what's called adaptive planning and how future opportunities can change depending on things like new legislation coming into play, or different funding paths, or different decisions affected by organizations, developers, etc., so that we can have a plan going forward for the foreseeable and pivot what solutions are being supported based on that going forward. So keen to just touch on a few things about IWM and where it's heading. We have, I guess, 5 disruptors that I want to quickly talk through that are going to really change where we go in the next 10 years. We're focused a lot on what's happened in the last 10 years. So I'll go through those one by one. The first one is embedding IWM in the planning process. If you can have one takeaway, please make friends with a planner, because this is a key thing that we need to be focusing on. We'll point you to in a link here. There is draft IWM guidelines for IWM planning, which really talk about how we can better integrate with the planning system, which obviously controls how development comes about. And we really want to emphasize here that the opportunity to integrate IWM happens at different scales, as you can see in the middle here. Often, once we get to the development scale, it can be too late to think about those bigger picture options. So there's 3 scales here, like a precinct scale, at a municipality scale, so what role can council play in setting out their objectives for IWM, and at what we call a strategic cluster scale. So that might be a town expansion, it might be in terms of a growth area, it might be a subcatchment which has a sensitive waterway. How can we do that IWM planning ahead of time to really think about what's possible and get that investment lead timeline in place? So to the question just then, how do we make sure that our organizations are planning ahead, whether that be for a recycled water supply or a regional stormwater harvesting scheme, to get that in place? The planning guidelines do have a whole section on possible implementation mechanisms, which are important to drill towards to make these things a reality. Some of those are aligned with the planning scheme and the planning process, but there are other delivery mechanisms which are important and are linked there. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that. Links provided. The next one I want to mention is working with traditional owners to really realize healthy country. And I think this will really reshape what we do in IWM, because there's so many synergies between thinking of the water cycle holistically, but even broader, thinking about the concept of country holistically as a whole, and caring for both waterways and their catchment, and really rethinking, as traditional owners do, that waterways are like our mothers, are like our ancestors. How do we treat them as a living entity with respect, and think about the whole of country as a living thing to integrate with, and really drive those outcomes with the same level of respect, and bringing waterways to the table as another stakeholder. There are so many layers of country, and water runs through all of those, and we shouldn't just think of them as water assets, but as that beautiful connection between mist, rain, sky, below country and on country, and all the expressions of water that we see there. The Birrarung has been recognised as a living entity, and that's something that many waterways across the world are being recognised as. And I challenge you to really rethink of not just water and how we can manage it, but what if we designed our places as if we were water? So from a raindrops perspective, how is it treated once it falls on country? Is it greeted with, if it falls on a road, is it immediately, doused in oil and sent down into an underground drain before it then returns to its mother as a living entity of the waterway? Or is it, welcomed into the landscape, cradled and, filtered and given the opportunity to bring a landscape to life? So really thinking about how we can reharness our design to think about how water moves through our cities. In terms of funding, I'll just touch on this quickly, but I think there is a lot of movement afoot in terms of how we bring together co-funding in a smarter way. And this is for the intent of things like the Swimmable Birrarung movement in Melbourne, which has a really big earth shot of an outcome to come about, to make the Birrarung swimmable, particularly in the central Melbourne areas, to welcome back communities to our waterways, but also to do the stormwater management that is needed and the wastewater management within the catchment to enable that. So how do we go about big picture ideas like that? And I think that's a real challenge for funding of IWM, because it involves so many benefits and so many beneficiaries that we need an effective way to bring those funding sources together to drive that outcome. One of the ways that is happening is through market-based instruments. So setting up a clear business case, which then creates an entity which would effectively allow those benefits or those initiatives to be bought and sold by people who are interested in paying for certain outcomes, and various sellers of services which can help to implement those outcomes. A key example of this has recently been done in London, who have a similar city scale problem with waterways pollution, in this case because they have combined sewers and storms lead to significant overflows. But they have set up a market-based instrument where every time you rip up a road and are replacing utilities, if they put back that road in a way which it has water-sensitive urban design or has permeability, then the fund is set up to effectively pay those utilities or pay those whoever's doing the works, and they can receive credit for that because that's in the interest of the water authority to effectively pay for those services and that gradual improvement over time. So lots of new thinking about how we can incentivize those kind of mechanisms. The third one is water circularity. So how can we harness thinking around a water circular economy to drive new outcomes in IWM? This is a typical water balance for any city. It's comparing here USA and Melbourne. We always have an excess of stormwater and wastewater in terms of the water balance compared to the water that a city actually needs. There is that imbalance, and it's effectively an excess of water in a city, but we're not harnessing it. So as our city grows, we're getting more and more of these kind of resources arising, but we're only using a portion of it. So in Melbourne's example, we're using 9%. That means that 91% of those urban water resources are going to waste, and they're impacting our environment at the same time. So how can we flip the conversation on those and look for more opportunities to increase demand? So flipping the conversation to look at how we can harness them in homes, for agriculture, particularly on the edges of cities, how we can use it for greening, how we can use it for future industries, which I'll talk about data centers shortly, or how we can scoop up those supplies and use them for city supplies. So whether that's purified recycled water or regional scale stormwater harvesting. This helps us reimagine our developments in a different way, and we can descale that circular economy to a development scale and really be thinking about the urban water they're producing and how that can be contained in more of a decentralized way. I've mentioned food bowls. I'll keep going with this one. The last one I wanted to talk about, and you probably didn't think I'll be talking about data centers in an IWM sense, but just to end on this, because it is a moving feast in terms of what are the drivers for IWM. Data centers certainly in the news and are something that water authorities and councils are finding coming across their desk, and they do have a water implication. Depends on design, depends on the size as well, but we are seeing that growing demand for data, and it will be housed in data centers, particularly in urban centers like Melbourne. As we're seeing bigger and bigger data centers in particular, the kind of cooling solutions that they utilize do increasingly depend on water. So whether that's evaporative cooling or something called adiabatic cooling, use water. So we do expect them to be large water users in many cases. And so with new water drivers coming in, and whether it's data centers, whether it's things like hydrogen, whether it's other major industrial demands, how do we make them good ancestors rather than just good neighbors? Can we use these as an IWM catalyst for new opportunities? And I think the way that we can do that is by having a major user. Can we make sure that they are using things like recycled water or stormwater? And also think about where we're driving those to be located. So can they be a catalyst for a broader alternative water network? Can we create water-rich environments where we're taking that water source, creating other, co-benefits in that area, and thinking beyond the life cycle of a data center, which may only be in its current form for 5 to 10 years? Are there other uses for that area where we want to bring those water resources and harness them locally? So a lot of interesting things on the horizon.
Once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and hope to see you soon in some of our future events. See you, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.